Welcome to Learn to Quilt Level 1. So I'm Tori from the Quilt Patch by Tori. I've been quilting for 20 years. I am a quilting instructor and pattern designer. And today we're going to go over some very basics of quilting. So we're going to practice cutting with rotary tools, pressing, using pins and perfecting that 1/4 inch seam, and then practicing that 1/2 inch seam. And we're going to make a pillowcase. So it's a great practice. If it's a little bit off, it's fine. The pillow will still fit. So keep in mind, this is practice. So it's supposed to be fun. It's a learning opportunity, and the pillow will fit if it's just a little bit off. So let's go ahead and get started. With your Learn to Quilt Level 1, you've got my top 10 tips for beginner quilters. We will go over some of what's in here today, but not all of it. I put it in here so you could get that information without having to fill up the course. So go ahead and check that out when you have a chance. You also get 30% off my book, which is What the FPP is That? Quilting Terms, a vernacular guide. So this started out as like a 2-page term sheet, and I wanted pictures and I wanted all kinds of stuff. So it turned into a 36-page book. So if you're interested in this, go ahead and check it out. It's in my shop, and you get 30% off just for taking the class. And you've got your pattern for the pillowcase. So this is very handy to have printed. You can take notes on it. Feel free to do whatever you like with this. I will tell you that the materials list on the front is a little bit larger than you need because I wanted you to have a little extra material to practice trimming and cutting your fabric. Because remember, today we're going over basics, which is including how to use those rotary tools. And then if you want to make another pillowcase and you want exact measurements, that's going to be the second table on the second page, right here. So that's when you want to reference to, yeah, when you go to the fabric store. Okay. So let's get started. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to switch to a PowerPoint. We're going to go over some very basic terms. So these are also included in the book, but these are the ones you need to know for today. I'm going to go ahead and screen share. There it goes. So welcome to Learn to Quilt Level 1, Tools of the Trade, which is all the basics for quilting by me, Tori. There you go. I find my mouse. So tools and materials. So first of all, if you're sewing along, that's great. You can also watch this later and make the pillowcase later. So tools of the trade, what we're going to need today, which is also included in your materials list, is, let me see if I can draw, a ruler. Ooh, it's a little wobbly line. Let's see if I can change the color. Red. There we go. So a ruler. So this is a basic cutting ruler, and anywhere between 18 inches and 24 inches is great. I love having a 6.5 inch ruler. I use a lot of 6.5 inch things, blocks within quilting, so it comes in really handy. So anything 6.5 by either 18 or even 24 is great. Cutting mat, you can see behind everything here, which is kind of a funky little circle. It's okay. So the cutting mat comes in really handy, and with the cutting mat, you want your rotary cutter, which is this circle blade. And that's going to make cutting a lot faster, easier, and straighter for you rather than using a pair of fabric scissors. But we do like having fabric scissors on hand for simple trims and thread and different other things. So we'll go over that a little bit more. Rotary cutter. Oh, I'm sorry, not rotary cutter. Seam ripper is great. In case you make a mistake, you can easily rip it out. That's one great thing about fabric, is that you can always fix your mistakes. Pins are great. Any straight pins that you can find. This is my cute little pin cushion, and you'll see some of those over there. I do have a preference for like odd color pins. That way I can mark different areas, so where to start, where to stop. And glass head pins are handy for pressing. So if you're planning on doing, well, we do a lot of pressing. Glass head pins are great because they do not melt when you press with an iron. And then you can see down here in this picture, I also have a couple other different scissors that you can use, great for trimming your threads and trimming a few fabrics that stick. And then if you look close, there's this little pile up here. Let me go ahead and clear these. Now it's getting a little messy. Okay, so this pile right here, if you do not like pins, I do not like pins, but they do come in handy. There are also clips. So I will show you an up close with that while we are making our pillowcase, but clips are also a good thing to have on hand if you do not like pins. And last but not least, this little circle thing right here is a tape measure. So it's really good to have a tape measure on hand to make sure that your quilt is straight as it goes. We won't really be using that today, but if you will be continuing with level 2, we will have a little bit of that in level 2. Okay, so those are our tools. Next, oh, I'm drawing. There we go. Thread. So, good rule of thumb with thread is to get a color that matches the main background of your fabric. So that can be, like today I'm using blue. So I would normally choose a lighter blue or a darker blue, depending on the tone of the blue, and go with something that matches. You can also choose a neutral. So having white, black, and gray on hand is very helpful. Those 3 colors you'll encounter a lot. A specialty project like this one behind me with all kinds of colors, I would definitely stick with a gray. Type of thread is personal preference. Sometimes machines like different kinds of thread. A good rule of thumb, though, is to stick with the same type of thread as you have fabric. So generally, we use cotton and quilting. 100% cotton is usually what we use, so we usually stick with 100% cotton thread or a cotton polyester blend of thread. That's what I usually use, is a cotton polyester blend, just because I have a long arm quilt, so I have a ton of these big spools that are polyester cotton thread that the long arm I rent likes. So because I have so much thread on hand here, I just use these for my regular machine. Now, if you're using a specialty fabric, getting the specific type of thread to go with that fabric is going to be a lot better for your overall project. Keep in mind that when you wash the fabric, that cotton shrinks, but polyester doesn't. So that's something to keep in mind. That's why with embroidery thread, it's all like polyester, it's all synthetic fibers, and it doesn't really shrink. It kind of settles a little bit into the stitches, but doesn't shrink. So if you use polyester thread with cotton fabric, the fabric will shrink, the thread will not. It can kind of cause a little bit of extra pucker, couple of a weird look. But if that's what you have on hand, it's great for learning with just a pillowcase. So don't stress about it too much today, but for future reference, using the same type of thread as you have type of fabric is a good rule of thumb. And then our materials today, we need a body of a pillowcase, which you need about a yard. So mine's going to be this blue Star Wars fabric. And I'm going to be using flannel today, just because flannel stretches a little bit more, and I like to use it as an example for what could happen as you sew. And then we need our border fabric, which I'm going to be using a navy blue. And flange is optional. This is completely decorative, and you can make it bigger, skinnier for a later project if that's what you like. I've got a nice big flange because I kind of like that little extra pop of separation between the border and the body of my pillow. And that's what we're going to be using today. Oh, last but not least, that quilting term guide I mentioned earlier to help you with any terms that we might encounter today. Speaking of which, we're going to go over some basic ones. So this, on the far left, is the pressure foot. Now specifically, I'm going to circle it. Specifically, the pressure foot is this part right here. It is what holds the fabric down while you sew, so when the needle comes up and down, in and out of the fabric, it stays where it's supposed to, and it helps it move as you sew. That's the pressure foot. And there are different kinds of pressure feet. Depending on the project you're working on, you can have specialty feet. But your standard foot will work well today. The needle! There's the sewing needle. Make sure it's fresh and not broken. And you want to make sure it's not bent, because that will cause you some tension issues, and we don't want any tension issues. That's what causes thread to loop, knots to make like underneath, they call nests. Or yeah, having a nice fresh needle is really good. And it's very simple to change. Usually there's one little screw you unscrew, needle drops down, you stick another one up. It's flat in the back, the needle is, so that it fits right up in your machine and it faces the correct way. So it's very easy to change. And don't be afraid to try it. Just make sure you don't poke yourself. The next one is the needle plate. So this is important to know, also known as the throat plate. This is important to know because this is where your measurements are going to be on how far away your fabric is from your needle. So there are some very complicated looking plates, which is the bottom plate there, and the top plate is a more simple plate. Generally, when we are quilting, we use the 1/4 inch seam. So we're going to be using the 1/4 inch measurement. So if you look real close, you can see it on the complicated looking needle plate, the one with more detail. You can see that 1/4 inch, and that's the distance away from the needle. Again, from the needle. The plate on top, you see 10, 20, 30, and those I believe are millimeters. And usually when you see a plate like this and you can't tell where the 1/4 inch is, just use the edge of your pressure foot. That's a good reference point for learning how to quilt, is just using that edge of your pressure foot. And that's usually a 1/4 inch away. Now, if it's a little bit off, that's okay. As long as you keep the same seam through the whole quilt, it'll still come out square. You can also buy specialty 1/4 inch feet. I think for every machine, like every major brand that I've heard of has a special 1/4 inch foot that you can purchase if you're worried about your 1/4 inch having that perfect 1/4 inch. And the bobbin. So I included bobbin just because that was a term that really threw me. Don't really know why now that I know what a bobbin is, but that is what lays under your machine plate, the needle plate, and feeds thread up to your needle. So the needle grabs in. Sorry, I had something for a second. The needle drops down, grabs the thread, and pulls it up from the bobbin. And that's where you get your thread on the bottom of your sewing, or your seam. And it's a good rule of thumb to have the same thread, at least type of thread, in the bobbin as you do in the top. Same thread. You'll get to know the different colors. Some colors, like for some reason, black is very hard to mix with other colors. Don't really know why. I did hear it's something to do with the dyeing process, but it might cause some tension issues if you have two different kinds of thread in your bobbin and in the top of your machine. So make sure those are the same. 1/4 inch seam. We're going to show that. And I put that in there to make sure you line up your fabric on the edge of your pressure foot if you do not have a 1/4 inch measurement on your needle plate. I didn't want to forget to mention that, so that's why it's repeated here. All right, let's get started. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over to the cutting table. We're going to start with prepping our fabric for our pillowcase. Okay, so here is our cutting mat and our cutting ruler. I do have today a 24 inch ruler by 6 inch ruler. So it's 24 long, 6 inches wide. And we're going to start with trimming our largest piece of fabric. So it should be a yard. Now your first cut, when you are cutting your fabric, is going to be to make a straight line. See, when it comes off the cutting table, you can see that it's jagged. Normally, like your local quilt shop usually is much better at cutting fabric. Some more department stores, it'll come like this. So I actually had my husband trim it with scissors so that it would be a little bit off so I could show you how to trim this up. I'm just kind of laying this out. Flannel likes to stick to itself, so I'm just kind of laying it out a little bit to get it ready to cut. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is make a straight line. So the way I prep this to make sure it's straight is I line up the selvage edge. So the selvage edge can look a little bit different. On flannel, it's pretty obvious. It usually has words or fuzzies or sometimes little holes from the the manufacturing process. And we want to cut this off eventually, but right now we're going to use it to help line our fabric up straight. This will be, in some cases, the straightest part of your fabric because it is the stabilizing threads in the weaving process. So I'm going to line those up together. Now I know from slightly earlier that this is going to be pretty far off. So I'm just going to make sure my selvage edges are lined up together. So here's the wrong side where you can't really see the design of the fabric. Here's the right side. It does stay folded in half as it comes off the bolt. So if you unfold it all the way, you have a completely open piece of fabric here. We're going to fold it wrong sides together, the selvage edges. So if you have a wrinkle in your fabric, that means your fabric is not straight. Fabric is trying to tell you it's not straight. So don't worry so much about this side of your fabric. Line up your selvage edges and we will cut that straight. There we go. And now the wrinkle is gone. So we're going to go ahead and trim this. So the way I do it is I line it up on the 1 inch mark on my mat. Now you can't see that, so I'm going to go ahead and scoot this down a tad so that you can see the mark that I'm talking about. I'm going to line it up on the 2 inch mark here. And I like to do it on the 1 or 2 just so I can see the bigger numbers. You can see on the mat here, the numbers are bigger right here. So I like to be able to see the big numbers. I'm going to line this up just like that. Now if your fabric hangs off the edge of your mat, you can go ahead and fold it just like me. I know some cutting mats are a little bit smaller. You can go ahead and fold it. Okay, then we're going to go ahead and line up our ruler with the closest line on our mat to our fabric starts. So we get, well, let me say that again. You gotta find the lowest part of your fabric. So looks like the lowest part here is going to be about halfway between my line for 17 inches and my line for 16 inches. It looks like, oh no, a little bit lower. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the closest 1/4 inch. So if it is about 3/4 inch here, which is pretty low, I'll line up on the 16. A little wiggle room here. Just like this. Now, after you got that lined up, you can use the lines through the width of your ruler to make sure that your ruler is straight all the way down this way and at the top all the way down this way through the width of the ruler. Line up all your lines there. That's why they're clear. So you can line up all the lines from your ruler with your mat. So it's nice and straight. Now we're going to cut. Get your rotary blade. Make sure it's unlocked. The blade should come out or slide down, depending on your rotary cutter. When you cut, you want to make sure your weight is in the center of the ruler so you can control the way it moves, or not to move, really. Spread out your fingers, tuck in your thumb. Do not get your thumb. And you want to press down. You don't want to press forward with either hand. You want to press down with your left, well, my left, when you're pressing that ruler down. Press down. And then with the rotary cutter, you press down and your momentum will carry you forward. So what you're going to try to prevent is the ruler from slipping as you're cutting. So here we go. I'm going to push down with my fingers out, thumb tucked in a little bit. Push down with the rotary blade. All the way through the fabric. And there's our straight line. Awesome. So for this pillowcase, our main fabric needs to be 15, well, we're going to fold it in half because it needs to be 43 inches long and 15 plus 15 and a half is 31 inches this way, 43 inches this way. Okay. Sorry. Sometimes I have to redo math in my head, make sure I'm doing it right. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and trim this. So I'm going to fold it. So I'm going to unfold that little part that was folded up at the top. So it's still folded in half. Selvage edge to selvage edge, still folded in half. I'm going to go ahead and fold this in half again. So I should have 4 selvage edges together. And this is just to make this trimming process a little bit more efficient. So we now have a straight line here and a straight line here. Our selvage edges. So we have selvage edges straight, trim line is straight. So I'm going to flip this over so I can see it. Again, I want to make this 15.5 inches long because it is folded in half. So when we unfold it, it should be 31 inches when it's unfolded all the way. So up here, make sure that the untrimmed part is still there. So we have straight line, straight line. Some wrinkles in there. Like I said, flannel likes to stick to itself, so I'm just getting the wrinkles out. Good way to scooch fabric for just a little bit is to kind of use your nails and just kind of scooch it just a little bit. Okay. Almost there. Stubborn. There we go. It's great to learn how to use, how to get those wrinkles out anyway. Okay. So we have a straight edge and a straight edge. I'll line up my selvage again with the 1-inch mark, which I know you can barely see on the edge there, but it's lined up again with the 1-inch mark on your mat. I'm going to square up my side with the 3. Now I like to make sure that it is square. Oh wait, hold on. Just a little bit backwards. I do a little extra thinking because my mat is backwards. So that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to do a little bit of math, making sure I've got this right. So what we want to avoid is cutting off the fold. That is definitely what we want to avoid. So we want it to be 15 inches. So I'm going to take that fold. I know this is straight on my selvage edge. So I'm going to line up that selvage edge on the top line up here now, which is on my mat is 23. So I'm going to line up on 23. And I'm going to line up the fold, not the raw edge, the fold, because my mat is a little bit backwards, and that's okay. Line up the fold on that 0 line, which is the first line on your cutting mat. This over so you can see it's the very first line before the big numbers. So fold on the 0, selvage edge, which we have 4 selvage edges together up here. We lined up on a top line, which mine is 23. And then we can easily trim at 5.5 inches. So we take our ruler, 15 and a half. So we go down to 15 and a half. Down to 15 and a half. Now I can see those numbers on my mat. So I take my ruler, I line it up on 15 and a half. Now I don't look at the edge of my ruler to line this up. I actually look at the half mark and I line that up on the inch mark. So for 15 and a half, I would line up my 1/2 inch on the 16-inch line on my mat. And then I use the width of the ruler and line up all the lines through the width of the ruler. So again, if your fabric is hanging off and you can't see your numbers or your lines, feel free to fold it, keeping the folds together on this side so it stays straight. That way you can see your numbers. Okay, 15 and a half. Now just double check, because I have a really bad habit of starting my fabric on the 1 instead of the 0 line. I'm going to count. So I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 and a half. Good to go. Again, the cutting, press down, not forward. Press down, tuck your thumb in. Ta-da! So we have 15.5 inches here. Now through the width of the pillowcase, we're going to need 43. So right now it's still folded in half off the bolt as it came off the bolt. Selvage edges are together, as you can see. So we need 43 inches this way. So half of 43 is 21.5. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it this time. I'm going to line up my fold, because remember, we do not want to cut off the fold. I'm going to line up my fold, which is here, on number 2. And I'm just choosing number 2 so that you guys can see it, because my mat's a little bit off camera. So it's on line number 2 here, lined up there, and then lined up straight at the top. So we have our straight line at the top, straight line fold down the bottom, and that's going to give us our width that we need. So mine, now some fabric is 42 inches. Some fabric goes up to 44 inches. So if you have a fabric that is slightly short, that is okay to still use. I do not want you to waste that fabric. You just might need a slightly smaller pillow. A little less fluffy pillow. But it'll still be just fine. If your fabric is a little bit bigger, you can go ahead and trim. Now it looks like mine is, I'm going to have to scoot it down just a little bit to fit on the mat. So we need 21.5 inches. So that when folded out, it's 43 inches. So from the fold, we're going to count down to make sure it's at where we need to cut. 21.5. So we're going to count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21.5. Mine is exactly 21.5. So I'm going to keep it as is. I know that my selvage edge, I normally like to cut it off, but I know that the selvage edge is going to be tucked into the seam, so I'm not going to worry so much about it. I'd rather have the length. Now, if you have the length, go ahead and just trim that selvage edge off. So you just line up your ruler lines with your mat lines. So I would cut off the selvage, I would line it up like this. Put your pressure down, push down to trim it off. Now it's ready. So we set that aside. If you're sewing along, you did it. You cut your first piece of fabric. Yay! For me, that was the worst, is learning how to cut. So here we go. This is going to be our border, which is the top of the pillow. Here's the selvage edge here. And see, this is not multicolored. It just looks a little bit different in person. So I'm going to go ahead and line that up. Let the fold drop down. This one needs to be 11 inches wide by 43 inches long. So first we're going to do the width. So it's sticking. Even. There we go. I've created a crease at the top there. So it's still folded in half, like it comes off the bolt. We're going to do the width first. So we're going to line it up. I'm just going to choose a random line this time. It's going to be 16 since it fits nicely on my mat. I'm going to fold it up so you can see what I'm doing. There we go. Line it up on 16. Grab my ruler because the first cut is always to make a straight line. So we're just going to choose the lowest point in the fabric and trim a straight line. Or go to the closest 1/4 inch. So I'm going to go to 16 again. It's going to go ahead and create my own straight line. So again, line up your numbers through the width of your ruler. Line up your lines through the width of the ruler. Make sure it's straight on the top and the bottom. Push down and tuck your thumb in. and trim on the straight line. So we have our straight line. And we're going to count over to 11 inches. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And my 11 is going to be on my 5-inch line. So I'm going to line up the edge of my ruler on that 5-inch line. Line it up through the width, all the lines through the width of my ruler on the top and the bottom. Push down. And we didn't have to make this side a straight line because we are cutting it off. And there's our border. That's ready. Oh, well, let me make sure it's the right length. So we have the right width. We've got to make sure it's the right length. So we need 43 inches. So I'm going to fold this in half again so it's easier to measure. Line this up. Line up on 3. I need it to be 43 inches long. It's 21 inches folded in half. So I'm going to unfold it. Just fold it once in half. Got too excited about folding there. Okay, I'm going to count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21 and a half. Perfect. I have the length. So it's the right length and it's going to stay that way. Again, I do know that flannel comes usually a little bit shorter, so that's why I'm not surprised about the length being exactly what I need. Again, the selvage edge is going to be tucked into the seam, so I'm not going to worry so much about it. But if yours is a little too long for 21 inches, go ahead and trim off the selvage edges. So make sure you do not cut off the fold. You want to keep the fold. Cut off the selvage edge. And then we do the same thing with the flange. I want the flange to be 3 inches wide and 43 inches long. We'll go ahead and keep it folded in half like it comes off the fold. And make, it looks like this is a straight line. So if your fabric does have a straight line, you don't need to create one. Use the fabric straight line that you have. So this looks straight. I'm going to line it up on this random line, which is 12. Make sure it's straight. And then I'm going to use my ruler to trim it. I'm going to line it up 3 inches down, which is unfold 1, 2, 3 on the line. 9 line on the 9 line. Since this edge is already straight, we don't have to worry about trimming that. We're just going to trim this side off. So it's 3 inches wide. So I'm going to fold this in half one more time. I'll line up the fold with the 1 and trim it at 21 and a half inches. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21 and a half. I'm lining up my ruler again with those lines, making sure it's straight on the top and the bottom, even in my little piece of flange. This fabric does like to move. And make sure you're pressing down and not forward. If you push forward, it tends to push the ruler around. Okay, so there we go. We're done with cutting. Yay! Okay, so we have our body of our pillow. We have our border, and we have our flange. Next step is to press our flange in half. Fabric, turn that over. Now this, I'm just going to go over very quickly the difference between pressing and ironing. Because in quilting, it is a separate skill. So I like to use water. You can also use starch. A brand called Best Press is very popular among quilters. And a mix of starch and water is also really good, and it helps keep your starch lasting longer. So if you have half starch, half water, it's a great way to do this too. I'm just going to use water today. I'm going to spray the wrong side of the fabric. So I know this is white, but if I had a right side and a wrong side, you're going to be pressing those wrong sides together so that you see the right side on both sides of your flange. Here you go. Fold in half, like a hot dog, not a hamburger. I mentioned I was a kindergarten teacher for 3 years. There you go. And half, press. So we are not pushing with the iron, we are pushing down and up, down and up. Now, as you get more experience, your up is going to be less pronounced, but I would suggest until you get that pressing perfect, you just want to go down and up, down and up, down and up. Because this fabric has no stabilizing threads. So if you push while like forward or over while you're pressing down, it will stretch your fabric. There's nothing to stabilize it. So once you start sewing, you start making seams, you'll get a little bit more structure, but you still want to avoid pushing. So you're just going down and up, down and up, down and up. So we're not pushing our fabric, we're just going down and up, down and up, down and up. And it's just folding in half. So if you did end up making a seam like me, your seam should be folded inside. There we go. And it is a little bit off, and that's going to be fine because that's going to be tucked in. So there we go. We are ready to start assembling our pillow. So the first thing we're going to grab is our border. We're going to take that raw edge of our border, we're going to open it up all the way. It's no longer folded in half, it is opened all the way up. All the way. I'm just going to show you the middle of this. But what we're going to do is lay this out, and you want your border to be right side up. So I know this is just navy blue, but that I can see the fold here. The fold should be facing me if it's up. So you want your pretty side up and your boring side down. Pretty side up for your border. Grab your flange. You're going to line up raw edge of the flange, the raw edge of the border. You can do this edge to edge, or you can fold this in half, find the middle, line it up with your middle. And I know this is the middle because the fold is there. I'm pretty confident I can just line that up. Middle, down, middle, down. Now to keep this here, I'm going to go ahead and grab a pin. And when we pin our pillowcase, we want the head of the pin to be facing up. That way we can easily pull it out when we're sewing. We'll just pin the middle right now. Check my size, make sure it's all lined up. Here it goes. Happy with that? Then you grab your main fabric. Now this one is going to be right side, so pretty side, down. So you want your pretty sides together. And we're going to be lining up the raw edge again. So not the selvage that you cut off, the raw edge lengthwise down. So all those measurements when we took 43, border's 43, the flange is 43, the body of the pillow is 43. Those are the sides that should be lined up. I'm going to find the middle. This one I needed to press so that it doesn't have a nice fold to show me where the middle is. Line that up like that. Using that pin I placed there for reference. Make sure the edges are lining up nicely, keeping the middle in place. Okay. Now here we're just kind of gonna baste pin. So basting is just a fancy word for temporarily holding. So I'm going to make sure my raw edges are together. All 1, 2, 3, 4 of them. I'm going to take out that middle pin and repin all 4 layers. So I have 1 pin in right now, and then I'm going to work my way down each side and pin every 4 or 5 inches. This is going to be a temporary pin. We're going to pin just a little bit heavier in just a minute. I'm going to pin, make sure my raw edges are together. Remember, fabric, not just flannel, but fabric likes to shift on you. So keep an eye every time you repin that your raw edges are lined up. I'm just going to work my way down, making sure my raw edges are lined up. Right now I have 3 pins in. I'll do one more close to the edge. I don't tend to pin on the edge. I tend to pin towards the middle, or in an inch or 2. So here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. This was my middle. Now I'm going to go down the other side. There we go. You can kind of use your fingernails to scoop the top layer around if you need to. Pin. Make sure your pin heads are facing up or out. That's a better way to describe that for you. That way they're easy to take out while we're sewing. They don't poke us. There we go. Okay. From here. Got our pins in. If you need to pause it, if you're still pinning, go ahead and pause it. This next piece is going to be fun. We're going to make a burrito. Make it a burrito. So we're going to fold. We're going to take, let's see if I can scoot this up a little bit. Just show down one side. So we're going to take the end of our pillowcase on the other end from where we pinned, the opposite end, and we're going to roll it up. Now I roll it up about like 2-3 inches. You roll, 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 roll. You want to stop right before you hit the pins. So about like that. The whole thing to be rolled up. Then we're going to enclose our burrito with the border. So we're going to grab that and we're going to fold it over, raw edges together with the raw edges we just pinned. So we should now have a total of 5 raw edges. So you have 1 border, 1 raw edge, that's the main fabric, 2 raw edges for your flange, and then 1 more raw edge for your border. This is the part where I would pin heavier, but make sure you do not grab that extra roll inside. I don't want that extra roll in there. It's your pin. Here's 1 pin, and then I'm going to work my way down. Now let me go ahead and fix the roll down here. Got a little fun when I rolled up the top. Doesn't matter what the inside looks like as long as it's out of the way. That's why it's rolled up. We want it out of the way. I'm going to focus on the body, the border, the border fabric here. We match those raw edges up, pin them together. So this time I'm going to pin about every 2 inches, just to make sure it doesn't shift, because it's a lot of raw edges to keep track of while you're sewing. And like I said before, fabric likes to move. Make sure the heads of your pins are facing out. Checking inside, make sure you get all the pins out. You don't want to run over a pin with a needle. It's a good way to break your needle. Bend your pins. Edges together. And 1 more. Last one. So if you're still pinning, go Go ahead and pause the video and keep pinning. From here, we're going to sew our first seam. Whew. So you're going to take this over to your machine. You're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam down the side of all the pins. I'm going to try to make sure you catch all of those raw edges, go all the way down, 1/4 inch seam. So here's an up close of my machine. So we have our pressure foot, our needle here. I'm going to use the edge of my pressure foot. Shift this. Use the edge of my pressure foot for my 1/4 inch seam. So you line up the side with the pins. Under the pressure foot, line up with the 1/4 inch. Drop your pressure foot. And here you can choose to there we go. Anchor your seam. So we're going to go, or anchor your stitch. So go forward and then back. You can go back like 2 or 3 stitches. Keep in mind, I'm going to be using white thread so you can see it really well. And then we sew straight down. You get to a pin, you pause, pull the pin out, stick in your pin cushion, and keep going. I would check, make sure you know where your fabric is. Like I said, it likes to shift, which is why we pinned it every 2 inches. So if you pinned it every 2 inches, it should be stable. But just double check. Just always know where your fabric is. There you go. So I'm going to go ahead and go up close. So we have fabric lined up. You see all the raw edges here, pins here, and we have that 1/4 inch coming out down there. We're going to go all the way down. Just pull the pins out as I go. So you can see that I'm getting a bunch here. So what happens when we sew is that the pressure foot and the walking feet, or not walking, I'm sorry, the feed dogs, which are the pokey things underneath the needle plate, it actually pushes the fabric just slightly as you sew. So with flannel being extra stretchy, it's going to push it a little bit more, which is why I chose flannel. So you can see that it's not you that's making this bunch happen. It's actually the machine. It's kind of the way it's made. Every machine will push your fabric just slightly, but down these really long seams, that slight push adds up and creates bunches. It's a really good thing to keep in mind, and I have a few ways of helping that bunch when we move on to other lessons. For now, just know it's not you. It's how the machine is made. Also keep in mind that we are making a pillowcase for practice. It's okay if it's not perfect. The pillow will still fit inside. So here we go. I'm going to go ahead and go back to my face. So we did our straight seam, 1/4 inch seam all the way down. Your goal here is just to make it as straight as you can and get that practice, taking that long seam down. To help that bunch, going from the middle to the edge will make it a little less dramatic, and the middle to this edge will help make that bunch a little less dramatic. But from here, here's the fun part. I find this the fun part. We're going to turn our burrito inside out. So here we go. You're going to take the middle. It's going to be kind of like pantyhose. It's the easiest way I found to turn it. You're going to turn the edges. Let me go ahead and make this slightly bigger. You're going to turn the edges down and push that middle out. And pull it slightly. Push, push, push. Like pantyhose. I'll pull it out. Not to be too rough with it, especially if you chose to use flannel. But you do have to kind of tug it. If you do have to tug it real hard, try to pull it on the seam that you just made. I found my seam right here. I can pull a little bit harder because that's where it's going to be the most stable. Again. Oh, almost there. Almost there. Ta-da! We have our pillowcase. Oh yeah. So our next step is going to be to press our border so that it has a nice line over the top. So I'm going to go ahead and lay that out. We're going to press it down. Remember, up, down, up, down, up, down. Don't push. We don't want to stretch our fabric. So what I do here with the flange is I lay the flange down. I mean, it's naturally laying down anyway as we sewed it. So you're just going to kind of press it open a little bit. So use your fingers, move it just slightly. You want to be very, very gentle to kind of move that seam so it's not tucked in. Very gentle, push it out and press it down, up, down, up, down. So probably easier over on the table than on my body. So let me go ahead and switch screens. I have my pressing mat. Here we go. And it's down. I'm going to make a nice fold and keep our flange in place. Spray a little bit of water. You don't want to soak it when you spray, whether you're using water or starch. You don't need to soak, just a light little dampness. I'm going to pull this out just slightly, press, and then press the outside. Slightly press. I just want to make sure there's no fabric stuck inside my seam. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording here. Just reiterating, go up and down, don't push. Up and down, up, down, up, down. I'm going to go ahead and press the rest of my pillowcase and come back. And we are back with our pressed border and flange. So our first step is to fold our border together. Oh wait, I just noticed that with the shift in the sewing, I do have a little bit of an off edge. So I'm just going to grab my ruler, line it up with the edge of my fabric. Now I know with what's coming, I'm going to be sewing a 1/4 inch seam and then a 1/2 inch seam. So this having about a 1/2 inch off is probably going to unravel, so I do need to cut off a little bit more. So if yours looks like mine, you can either leave it alone and trim it later if you feel comfortable doing that, or you can trim it right now. Just to be visually appealing, I'm going to go ahead and trim it right now. So I'm going to line up my ruler with the border fold up there, and then line up the edge of my ruler with the lowest part of the fabric, which is the flange at this point. I'm just going to make sure it's straight here and here. And then I'm going to trim. And keep in mind that as that fabric was pushed, it did shift a little bit. And that's all you need. And I do like I said, I like using flannel as an example because it shifts more, so you can see the dramatic difference in what it could look like. Hopefully, with cotton, your shift is very small and you don't even need to trim. Okay, now trim. So we are going to sew our pillow together first with right sides together. So you're just going to match those borders at the top, and all your pre-fabric should be showing. It should be showing. So we're going to tuck in. Right side. So we're going to tuck in our seam. So the first seam is going to be on the outside. I'll show you how we're going to tuck that in just a second. So you can also line up your seam on your border and your flange, if you would like. So see where the white and the white meet the blue. You can also line that up. And here, I'm going to either pin or use your clips. Good. These are great if you don't like pins. It kind of gives you an extra hand. So we're going to clip right where the seam meets. And then if you feel comfortable sewing with just a few clips or a few pins, you can do that. Just make sure when you pin, if you're not using clips, to have your pins face the outside. So as you sew, you can easily pull it out without poking yourself. I'm going to go ahead and pin. I have a few more pins than I do clips handy, so I'm just going to do this. Most of my clips are with my hand sewing. So here we go. Pins sticking out. You're going to do a 1/4 inch seam down the raw edge. You're going to pivot at the corner, which I will show you, and then stitch down the other raw edge and stop at the fold. So it's a 1/4 inch seam down the 2 raw edges. So here we go with our pillowcase. I'm going to keep it here as I sew down the side so that when I get to the corner, I can show you how I pivot. So we're going to drop our pressure foot after we line it up, slide up on the 1/4 inch. I'm going to go forward and back. It's about 3 stitches, 2 to 4, it's fine. We'll lock your stitch in so it doesn't unravel. It's like putting a knot in your thread. Okay, I'm going to sew down. Make sure you know where your fabric is. It likes to move. Flip out. Yes, I'm approaching the corner. Now, if you see here, I have one piece that's slightly longer than the other. I'm going to stop a 1/4 inch from the edge of my shortest piece of fabric here. So I'm going to stop about there. Down. My fingers on it so I can feel it. And with my pressure foot that I'm using, hitting the edge of that pressure foot is about a 1/4 inch away. So I'm going to go ahead and stop. Pivot. Heel down, pressure foot, lift it up, pivot the fabric, and notice that with the flannel it did stretch quite a bit, but there is my edge. It's going to peter down. So now if this is really putting you off, keep your pins in, your pin here, keep your pins in. You can trim this. It's really throwing you off. For me, it's fine. I can tell where my fabric is from both experience and by touch. I'm going to go ahead and sew that down. You just do again a 1/4 inch all the way down. So we made it 1/2 inch or 1/4 inch all the way around. Ta-da! So from here, all you have to do is, if you do have any of that extra hanging off there that you're comfortable with sewing next to, go ahead and trim that to 1/4 inch away from your seam. So you can use that ruler, line it up a 1/4 inch away. So I'll show that real quick. And then we'll turn our pillowcase inside out and then press. So we have to pull those seams up. So we're almost done. There you go. Here's the extra length. Go ahead and trim that. Line up my ruler. Here's the 1/4 inch, which is that first line, but the little tiny line with the next one. Line that up on my seam. You can see that shifted all the way down, but it's just fine. Go ahead. Whoop. this point, this is where fabric scissors come in handy, where if you didn't quite cut this off, you want to avoid putting the rotary cutter over it again. It might trim off a little too much if your ruler shifted. So we grab our scissors and we just snip. There we go. Now I accidentally shifted my ruler a little bit and it cut too close to my seam, so I'm going to go ahead and do the seam real quick before I move on with the rest of our lesson. Seam is fixed. So we have a corner seam all the way around. Next step is to push it, or pull it, I should say, inside out. You want to make sure your flange is facing the correct direction, so you want to make sure it's laying down. Make sure your seam is directly on the fold. You don't want your seam to be tucked in. I'm going to try to pull that out with your fingers. I would use your fingers first, kind of finger press it, making sure you pull the fold out. You can also push it out with your hand. Stick your hand inside and kind of run your finger along it, and that will help pull any fabric stuck in the seam out. And we're going to press this in place. Here's your corners. I use my finger first, and if my corner's being stubborn, grab a pin. Especially with flannel, I don't like to use scissors. A lot of quilters we use scissors to push out a corner. Flannel is a little looser weave, so I use a pin to kind of just pull a couple threads out and out. And you want to make sure the bottom seam is all the way out, no fabric tucked in there. I'm running my finger down to the corner, pull that corner out. Should we do it up close on that? Tuck in a few threads and pull. Okay. And we're just going to press it in place so it doesn't shift on us, it doesn't hide any fabric. And we do a half inch seam. I'll spread some more. You only need to press the two sides that you just sewed. Press up, down. Remember, up, down. We're not pushing. Up, down, up, down, up, down. Up, down. I can see it's trying to hide some fabric in there. Make sure your seam is right on the fold. See that? It's a little sticking. Shake it a little. There we go. Make sure your flange is laying down. I'll hold it here for just a little bit longer. It's a thicker seam. Okay. Now we stitch a ½ inch around, ½ inch seam on the two sides that you just sewed. So not all the way around, but just the side that you sewed. And then pivot again and go down the other side. Exact same way as you did. Pivot in the corner. Stop about ½ inch away this time because we're doing a ½ inch seam. Stop on the corner, needle down, put your pressure foot up, pivot, and then go ahead and go all the way down. Here's an up close look of that fold. You want to make sure that seam is right in that fold. We're going to use a ½ inch. So remember, the lines are going to be on your needle plate. Find your ½ inch line. Now, if you do have the 10 and 20 and 30 inch plate, you can go ahead and even use a ruler to make sure which one is that ½ inch. So we're going to go ahead and backstitch. That's it. And then go all the way down, 1/2 inch, all the way around the 2 sides that you just sewed. So here we are at the corner. I sewed all the way down my seam. I'm going to stop about 1/2 inch away. Lift my pressure foot up, pivot. Go a little bit more than 1/2 inch. Put down, sew a few stitches. Up. Needle is still down. Pivot, and then keep it all the way down. And here we are. Our 1/2 inch seam done. We have it down the raw edge. Post raw edge. Raw edge. We just turn it inside out, and you press those seams just one more time, and you are done. So we learned some awesome skills today. So we went over how to use your rotary tools, how to pin, use that 1/4 inch seam and a 1/2 inch seam, and how to press. So please keep that pressing in mind. It is an important skill. I used to think it wasn't. I used to think it was just ironing, but pressing has made a huge difference in my quilts. Just having an up, down, up, down, up, down. Like I said, as you get more practice, your up, down won't be so dramatic. Yeah. So I hope you enjoyed this video today. I would love to see your pillowcase when it's done. And from here, we will be going on to level 2, which is all about piecing. Now with piecing, we're going to talk about cutting efficiently. So I'll do a very brief review of using those rotary tools, but it'll be more about efficient cutting and how to cut in bulk. And then we will talk about how to put your seams together so that they nest, and how to square your blocks and square your rows and put the whole quilt together. So I hope to see you in level 2. Have a great rest of your day.